Good afternoon, good morning. For some of you joining from abroad, a bit far away. So my name is Estelle Ballion. I will be the moderator for this satellite session of the INCSA conference. The theme is Science Advice for Energy Policy, Who is Afraid of Epistemic Diversity? And this is co-organized by the European Commission Joint Research Center and the group of chief scientific advisors and the scientific advice for policy from the European academies. So for this session, you are on a webinar format. And for any practical aspects, next slides, please. We will have technical support. You can send a note to in case you have an issue. This is identified with Agnieszka, and in the chat, you can access the chat. You will be able to send a private chat to technical support. And with us as well, we will have Toby Wardman, who will be helping with different aspects of this seminar. We have a special format for you. We will start with opening reflections with two speakers bringing some interesting perspectives on the question. And then we will have a format that's quite innovative, a fishbowl conversation, bringing together some panelists, but also some of you, some audience members who will be able to join the conversation. And I will introduce that more in details after the opening. Then we will have a closing part with also two speakers who will bring a little bit some insights from what they heard during the discussions and what also their experience is on science advice and bringing together those multiple perspectives and disciplines in bringing science to policy. So with this, I will start the opening session with asking Mr. Naki Shenovic to give some opening remarks. Naki, if you want to introduce quickly yourself and give us some triggering remarks for this session.
Thank you, Estelle. Well, my name is Nebojša Nakićenović, as you have just heard, or please Naki for short. I am Deputy Chair of the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors to the European Commission. So let me just say that it's really a great pleasure to have the opportunity to welcome all of you to this INCSA 2021 satellite workshop on behalf of the Group of the Advisors. I would in particular like to thank INCSA for the opportunity to discuss the challenges and best practice in science with such a globally diverse group that we have today and the audience. And I would also like to express my thanks to SAPEA and Joint Research Center for co-organizing the workshop with a group of the advisors. I believe that many of you might not be familiar with the science advice mechanism of the European Commission. So allow me first in just a few minutes to say a few words about how it works. The group of advisors was set up to support the European Commission's policy with high quality, timely and independent scientific advice. And I think the emphasis needs to be on independent, on complex issues that require holistic and, let me say, interdisciplinary approaches. The group itself is multidisciplinary. It includes expertise in chemistry, biology, geography, religion, robotics, plant scientists, and also energy, which is the topic of our fishbowl today. The group develops policy recommendations for the European Commission. They are called scientific opinions, and they're based on the scientific evidence. And this evidence is provided by the evidence review reports of SAPEA. Now, SAPEA is a co-organizer of this event, as you know. This is a consortium for science advice for policy of European academies. That's the acronym SAPEA. It gathers expertise across a variety of disciplines from over 100 academies and learned societies across Europe. So this ensures, I would say, diverse and balanced input from a broad range of experts around in Europe and around the world. So the group of the advisors, SAPEA, and the secretariat in the commission comprise together the scientific advice mechanism, or SAM. And the last scientific opinion and evidence review report were actually on energy transition that we will be discussing today, the challenges of how to change the energy system. I will not go into the detail of our recommendations. Let me just say that we consider it to be central for the transition to be immediate and to adopt innovative technologies and behaviors that needs to be backed up by regulatory and market measures, along with social and lifestyle changes to incentivize and support the low carbon energy choices. So I guess in one word, one could say the recommendation is to put the people first. And I hope that that we will reflect in the little bit in the fishbowl discussions. And I'm really happy that we have this format. I believe it is much more inclusive than the traditional workshops and gives opportunity to many more people to speak. So I'll be very short in my introductory comments. Let me just make the following observation. In my view and my experience, the diversity and transdisciplinarity are essential for evidence-based scientific advice. I think that needs to be central. If you think about global problems like the immediate COVID-19 danger, climate crisis, digital revolution, and energy transformation, these are all very complex and require systemic, transdisciplinary, and integrative science, as they cannot be resolved in isolation in academic silos. So let me, in this context, quote Gary Brewer, who said, "World has problems, universities have departments." And I'm afraid that that's also the case with governments. They have departments and ministries. Private sector has business units. And what we need is really an integrative approaches. So I think that the fishbowl event is appropriate for discussing epistemic diversity today. And I believe also in general to achieve the sustainable energy for all without leaving anybody behind. In conclusion, I believe that one of the aspects of the fishbowl events is to share some of the experiences. So let me just conclude with two personal experiences I had. One more successful in policy advice than the other. The first is the global energy assessment that included some 300 authors, and Diana was one of them. And the motivation was that the Millennium Development Goals did not include energy at all. And I think it was successful in the sense that the recommendations of global energy assessment entered the Sustainable Development Goal number 7. The targets themselves in the goal come from the assessment conclusions. By 2030, universal access to energy services, doubling the rate of energy efficiency improvements, doubling the share of renewables, all by 2030, and ramping up research and development and deployment financing. Now, the second example goes actually half a century back. That example came with the publication of The Energy in a Finite World book in 1981, but the work was done in the 70s, and I had the honor and privilege to be an author. And don't forget, this was during the days of the Cold War, so it included also, it was very comprehensive, included the future of Soviet Union that until then was not known at all. Now, in addition to that, it also had 3 scenarios to 2030, so essentially 40 years projections into the future. And if I may just quote it, the median one actually projected for today temperature increase of just over 1 degree, and IPCC just concluded that in its 6th assessment report. So the science was right, but it had almost no policy impact. We are 40 years later with very little being done in achieving the net zero emissions. So I hope that over the next 30 years, we will be there. So let me just close by saying that I think that the diversity of perspectives is essential for developing common language. I think that's the key. Trust as well for policy advice, and also for action towards sustainable future for all. And I think we have to make sure that nobody is left behind. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Naki, for these very inspiring words, with also giving also some topics that can be further explored during the fishbowl. Now we will have also the perspective of the policy side. So I'm going to ask Tom Verhelen to also give some words for opening this session. Tom?
Thank you, Estelle. Well, the same introduction in reverse as Naki. I think I'm very happy to be here. Given what my job is, which is working for the European Commission in the Department on Climate Action and dealing with economic assessment and strategy, I think I'm a heavy consumer of well, the discussions we will have today and on the cross-sectoral approaches in science on how to inform climate policy. My intervention will focus, I think, on a few key areas where we need scientific advice. And I think it all starts with understanding what is the problem. And that's, of course, the science of climate change itself. What are its impacts? How can we solve them? And that includes both adaptation to climate change and mitigation of climate change. And I think we have an international institution, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is key there. I think itself is a good example of bringing many different scientific communities together. And as a policymaker dealing indeed also with colleagues in other countries, I think that is already a key example of how multiple scientific channels come together and inform policymakers. And in that way, I can only underline its importance. If you then drill down, there are a number of tools we use to inform how we can deal with change at large scale. What we typically use on the policy side is integrated assessment models. It is still a very useful tool to explain what are the changes that will need to happen in the economy to deal with mitigation or adaptation. And today I'll focus on mitigation because it's the topic I mainly work on. These models bring together engineering, basically the technologies represented. They bring together the sciences that deal with population growth, that deal with economics. They bring together climate science, and they do so at global scale and more also at local scale. And I think it's a very important toolbox that we use both at global level and regional level. We ourselves in the Commission do not have a single integrated assessment model, but we are heavy consumers of models that will cover similar aspects and that allow us to look at economy-wide change. Economy-wide change needs to look at sectoral change. And of course, there are a number of key areas that we need to look at to deal with mitigation: energy, transport, industry, waste, agriculture, forestry, and land use, just to have a few examples. So you need to be able to cover that. You need to be able to cover that from a modeling perspective, but also from, let's say, a more detailed sectoral perspective. And you need the scientific information for that. When you want to change behavior, or let's say the actions and the practices of private agents in those sectors, you'll need to put a policy in place. And just looking at the energy sector, you have a number of tools. And again, we will need to have science to inform us. You could have standards, command and control. You can do pricing or financial support policies. You can deal with it simply by providing improved information. But often you'll have to go beyond the private agent. You need to look at your regulatory environment that deals with market functioning. And you will need a bit of engineering, often from the government side, providing for infrastructure. So for me, again, a key example where you bring many sciences together. Bringing incentives to people, well, I think economics is a behavioral science in a way. And there we will have to say, okay, you might have a higher or low elasticity, but what does that mean in real life? And here I would say that also science starts to take steps in, well, different forms. How do you cater for changing behavior at society level? For instance, what could be the impact of dietary change? And should one have policies around that? Question mark. Something I think that leaves the realm of the traditional way of economic theory. I think over time also, what is utility? Can we have the same utility for individual agents, even though they have a changing consumer pattern that is less problematic for the atmosphere? Just examples where I think multiple streams come together. Finally, as the Commission, I think I listed a number of typical areas where you would like to deal with mitigating climate change, but we have certainly invested strongly in mainstreaming climate policy beyond the sectoral approach. So think about very different policy fields like finance, where we, for instance, are working on taxonomy. Think about employment, where we are trying to focus on skills for a changing economy, and also just transition to deal with the sectors where we simply will have losses in economic output. I'm very happy to see a colleague of recovery here. That's a very, well, in a way, it's a new policy topic, but having him here today talking about climate change, I think is a signal how we are mainstreaming climate policy inside EU policies. Finally, one can have a regulatory toolbox for that. And in the Commission, I think what is important to underline is that we have better regulation that requires us to take a number of steps. Notably, when we prepare a policy, we need to apply, let's say, analytical tools to assess the impact of the policy, translate it into impact assessments. And again, these impact assessments are mainly based on input from science. There's also a very strong public consultation element where we try to bring these two things together. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Tom, for bringing forward some of the challenges and perspectives on the policy side, also highlighting the complexity of the issues and the need for the different perspectives to step in to be able to provide some useful advice to the policy side. So now we are going to have a special session where we actually are mimicking a format that's used in face-to-face, then called the fishbowl. And we will have a chance for you to also join this session at some point. So I'm going first to explain a little bit how this will work. The fishbowl is basically having a speaking circle and having the other people listening, but anyone is able to join the speaking circle. The speaking circle in the virtual environment will be the webcams that we have on, and all the other webcams will be off for the panelists who will not be in the speaking circle. But there is a chance to join the speaking circle for you as an audience member by raising a hand. And our technical support, Toby, will move you into the panel. And during the conversation, I will ask you at some point to join with turning on your webcam and with contributing to the conversation as you have requested to have a contribution. This means also that because the webinar is being recorded, that if you are part of the panel, you agree to your intervention being recorded. So, of course, this contribution has to be short and to the point. We will keep each intervention as concise as possible, but the idea is really to have a flow of conversation that actually brings forward some experiences from our great panelists, bringing forward different perspectives from different disciplines, and from our audience, our great audience as well, for reacting to these experiences, reacting to what they also hear, and bringing maybe forward some of their own experiences. Okay, so this is very new. This is new for me. This is new for the panelists. I guess this is maybe new also for you as a format. So I will ask for your cooperation to try this and be maybe also bear with me and bear with everyone in the panel, because some hiccups might happen and we might also be a little bit fine-tuning some aspects, but the idea is really for everyone here to have a chance to hear some interesting stories and even contribute some interesting stories. Okay, thanks Toby for the slides. You can turn them off. One important aspect is because the speaking circle will be the webcams that are on, is that you are in a gallery view, so you should be able to see everyone. If you're not, please check in the chat to ask for technical support. The gallery view is a way for you to follow the conversation of the speaking circle with the different panelists who are going to interact. Okay, so our triggering question for this first part of the fishbowl is really about some success stories of bringing together for complex policy questions, bringing together some different disciplines and some different perspectives. How can this work? Have you experienced, and I'm going to ask the question to the panelists who are going to join me in a minute, how did you work that out? Did you experience it? What were the surprising outcomes, or what were maybe some other lessons learned you can bring on the table? So for this first part, I'm going to ask some of our panelists to turn on their webcam to bring forward some of these their experiences. So may I kindly ask Jacopo Toriti to turn on his webcam. He is a professor. Jacopo, you're a professor of energy economics and policy at the School of the Built Environment in University of Reading. I would like also to ask Ginny Stephens to join me and Jacopo. So Ginny is joining us from Northeastern University. She is the director of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs and the Dean Professor of Sustainability Science and Policy. May I also kindly ask Tula Thierry to join me. So Tula is the chair of Eurocase, and she might introduce a little bit on this aspect as well, and the president of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. Thanks for joining, Tula. I will also ask Diana Urkev-Borsats to join me for this first part. Diana is a professor at the Department of Environmental Sciences and Policy, Central European University, and she's a member of the IPCC, so right on the follow-up with the discussion on climate that we had as introduction with Tom, and a member of the SAPEA Energy Working Group. Thanks for joining, Diana. So what we're going to do is start a conversation. I will ask one of the panelists to start the conversation, illustrating some examples of trying to bring together those multiple disciplines to answer to a policy challenge. If anyone from the other panelists want to join at some point the conversation, he or she can raise a hand in the system, but then it will have to be switched with someone who is already in the conversation. So I will kindly ask someone who feels they have contributed enough to step down. If someone from the audience would like to join the conversation with us, same thing, he or she can raise a hand, and then Toby will move the person with us. And at some point, I will ask the person to turn on the webcam, quickly introduce himself or herself, and then have a contribution to the conversation. We have in total, we will have in total maximum of 6 webcams on, so that we have a chance to hear a bit of everyone. So let's start the conversation. I know maybe Jacopo, do you want to have a quick intervention on some success story? And then I'll ask maybe Tula and Jenny and Diana to follow up.
Thank you.
Jacopo?
Thank you, Estelle. I think mine is a success story, provided that you define success as challenging policymakers and monodisciplinary thinking. So I'm on Ofgem's academic panel. I've been for a few years, and I thought of something that happened recently, and a success based on causing reflection, being a critical thinker around other disciplinary approaches which have not been undertaken on a specific piece of analysis or work. So I was peer reviewing work on demand-side flexibility, and basically there were assumptions which, like many around energy demand, were heavily based on behavior and on price, being able to, and technology being able to change behavior of individuals, and because the piece was around energy demand and flexibility, I was suggesting to bring in a more different disciplinary approach, including social practices and the timing of energy demand, and there's a whole literature around that. Now, if you may say, okay, I caused some headaches because the whole piece was stopped and caused reflection and you know, taking a few months off the gas for the regulator to now rethink about it. I think it's just I wanted to kick off with this example because it's not the typical or we feed in some numbers which are needed, the kind of low-hanging fruit is a bit more of a major rethink. So it really depends on how you define success. But I thought my short story would be around this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jacopo, on this idea of challenging the monodisciplinary approach, and that might bring headaches, but that's also bringing some new views and some catalyzer. Any of the other panelists would like to either react to that or add? You can turn on your microphone if you want to take the floor. Yes, please go ahead. Take the floor, Diana. I see you want to do it, and then I'll give the floor to Tula, who has also an experience on that.
Why doesn't Tula go first?
Okay, so Tula, do you want to add more on this question of how do you bring together those different disciplines? What are the surprising outcomes you can get, or some lessons learned you had from your experience?
Thank you. My perspective is that of engineering, and we have one example, you know, which is very illustrative of how science advice can contribute to policy. It's a broad energy agreement in Sweden, 2019, which was actually shared by the majority of the political parties in Sweden, and it was to a large extent based on a project by the Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences, EVA. EVA was founded about 100 years ago, and we have had many subjects on our agenda, but energy has been on our agenda all of the time for 100 years. So the solid fact base for this energy agreement came from a project that we run all together with 16 different reports looking into the different aspects of energy production and consumption in Sweden. And so what we do and what academies often do is that we bring together different sectors in the society, scientists, industry, public authorities, and policymakers, these different perspectives that were mentioned before. And we could see that this energy agreement actually is something that most of the political parties were behind it, and that's why also these recommendations have been gradually implemented in practice. So the agreement was not only focusing on energy production, but also on the efficiency of energy distribution, and also the need of increased flexibility or adjustability of electricity market to be able to manage what we foresee a mix of different sources of energy that are going to be needed for a complete energy system. And so also what we could, of course, see, and what we see in all these kind of projects is that it's not just technology, it's not only the opinions, but there are also regulatory actions which are needed to accomplish these kind of policy actions. And one of the things that, as an example from this particular project, was that we were recommending certain adjustments in the taxation of, for example, hydropower, and these were implemented because of this broad agreement. So and then there are also, when I'm thinking about the national, international perspectives, one of the things that we recommended to work on in 2016, but we're still trying to solve, is how the capacity could be increased to transmit electricity across the borders in the Nordic countries. And this work has taken a lot longer to solve than many of the technical aspects of this issue. So I think this also has a bearing to the EU perspectives, which are very well visualized in this energy report. So I think one of the learnings that I could say, in this is that, these kind of agreements, they take a long time to achieve. And even with the agreement in place, the implementation can't be taken for granted. I guess my message would be that this kind of an agreement needs to be revisited regularly. The discussion needs to continue, because it will not be solved by just one agreement.
Thanks a lot, Tula. Yes, so revisiting an agreement, making sure that on the long term you have a way to always maintain the dialogue. I heard also that at the beginning how important it was to engage not just different disciplines of expertise, but also policymakers and even politicians, to get them on board early in the process. Maybe something also to keep in mind. I see from our panelists who would like to take the floor. I see also Thomas, who can turn on his webcam if he wants to join at some point. Diana, yes? And
Yes.
before you start, Diana, just to remind the participants in the audience, they can raise their hand as well if they want to join the conversation. Thanks, Diana. Thanks. Sorry.
Yes, this is a very interesting format. So my success story is from the SAPEA, which you already kind of introduced, science advice for policy by European academies. And they commissioned the energy transition report, which was done for the group of chief scientific advisors, of whose vice chair is Naki, and that worked by selecting 20 leading academics from Europe, all around Europe, from very different disciplines. And that has been extremely interesting experience. And I think by the end, we all really identify with the final findings, but the road to there wasn't easy. And at the end of this short intervention, I will offer some interesting lessons. But because we don't know yet whether it will be truly successful in terms of catalyzing policy change, although I do hope it will. But I wanted to offer a short insight from more historic evolutionary insight from the IPCC. If you think about it, originally, the IPCC was mostly meteorology. Even though it had 3 working groups, it was mostly all IPCC focal points were institutes of meteorological institutes in the different countries. And after we understood, yes, there is a big problem. And in fact, the problem is caused by our energy consumption. Energy was brought in, and suddenly the shift also went to the engineers. So the technological domain, because we have to have the solution. But then by, let's say, third assessment report, and I joined at the 4th assessment report. So definitely by the 4th assessment report, we were very convinced that actually we already have the technologies. We can fight climate change, we can stop it. And we do have, of course, further R&D is very important, but we don't need to wait for new technologies, because actually we already do have technologies to fight climate change. So once we understood that, it still didn't happen, nothing changed. So we understood, okay, perhaps the problem is the cost. Yes, people are afraid of the cost. So the 5th assessment report did a much more thorough job at looking at the cost and economics of climate change, as well as mitigation, and concluded that it is not going to cost the Earth. It's not going to break the bank. But still, major change wasn't really coming along. And I think it's when in the 6th assessment cycle, this was first when we truly managed to integrate social sciences and humanities. For example, in the 3rd working group, we have a separate chapter, which is on energy demand and services, and basically, well, we put a lot of social science together. And the special report in this cycle, the 1.5 degree report on global warming, was a truly interdisciplinary and epistemically very diverse report, where even the authors were very mixed, even within every single chapter. And I think that was perhaps one of the reasons for its major success of the report, since before that report, if somebody muttered 1.5 degrees, it was still kind of in the scientific community, it was kind of a tree hugger. It's not the right academic, but by now we see in politics that there is a major political will, and we have 73% of global emissions currently already committed to climate neutrality, even though before that it was not sexy. But I think I want to offer two lessons. One lesson is from the SAPEA report, and it's also true. It was also true, of course, in IPCC, in the global energy assessment that Naki offered. I think it was perhaps less of an issue, but very often when very different disciplines work together, especially in the domain of energy, very often there comes a little bit of epistemic dignity, where yes, you listen to the other discipline, but you keep thinking, oh, this is totally wrong. They don't know anything about energy. Here is my solution. You don't realize your technology won't work because my social science, or vice versa. The economists or engineers feel, okay, we have the solution. So what are you talking? So of course, I'm making it very extreme, but and polarized. But I think it is true that a culture of more epistemic humility is really important to have epistemic diversity to succeed. And my final
conclude quickly, Diana, please.
Yes, is that I think art beyond just different disciplines. I think it's also very important to involve art. And for example, the IPCC is working more and more with art, and we have to understand. And I think it's very good because art shows that people not only decide by knowledge but by feelings.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting trigger maybe for some new intervention. So I have Jenny and then Thomas, and maybe if an audience member wants to join, please raise your hand and you can join the conversation. Jenny, Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah. Great to have this opportunity to share. And I'm going to get the example I have is about Massachusetts, which is the state in the United States where Boston is. And we've been trying to be a leader on energy transformation. And one of the things I want to start by pointing out is that epistemic diversity requires also diversity of people who is involved in science and social science. And one of the reasons I recently wrote a book called Diversifying Power, Why We Need Anti-Racist Feminist Leadership on Climate and Energy. And one of the points in the book is that because of a lack of diversity of people, we have been focusing too much on technological innovation and not enough on social innovation. And when we don't focus on social innovation and social science, we miss the social justice implications of the policies and the attempts. And I think the lack of diversity is partly why we have been inadequate and insufficient in the urgency of the energy transformation. So the example that I give is here in Massachusetts, we had very strong solar incentive policies that were based on what Diana was also talking about, the economics and the technologies available, without very much consideration of the social implications. And so the incentives went to all wealthy households, and they got solar panels with big incentives and single family homes only, and huge parts of the population were excluded from these solar policies. And the price, the benefits went actually exacerbated inequities because the well-off households got low or free electricity from their solar panels once they paid off, and other households, the energy burden became even bigger. So only more recently, when more attention was given to social science, more inclusive policy processes that go beyond the published literature of a narrow group of experts, and include more broad considerations of the scientific advice in the policy making, was when we were able to change this shift and recognize the importance of the social justice aspects. So I think as a woman who has, I want to speak specifically about gender diversity, but also diversity of all kinds, race, religion, age, ableism. We know that when women, people of color, marginalized groups are in positions of power and are part of the decision-making process, we bring different experience, different priorities, different perceptions of risk, and that shapes what actually happens. So it's really important to connect the scientific content with also the understanding the broader conversations about who even has access to be considered a scientist, and how we can broaden even the role of expertise. And I'll just say, as a woman working in energy for the past 20 years, I have gone to energy conferences where it's mostly all men with just a handful of women in the room, maybe 300 people, and the women, we notice and check in with each other, and we are thinking about some some connections in some different ways. And I'm not making broad gender generalizations, but we all have to acknowledge that based on our life experiences, we bring different priorities, and that that life experience diversity is also critical to getting more epistemic diversity for more effective energy action. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ginny, for this contribution, bringing also in perspective the diversity of people that you raised, and the link between social innovation and social justice, which is not always visible within the current policy discourse. So I will ask maybe if you're okay with switching a little bit with the panelists who haven't spoken. Diana, if you're okay for switching off a little bit, and then I'll give the floor to Thomas. And Clark has just joined us as well. So Thomas, if you want to contribute, we have heard a lot, I mean, some discourse also about how do you actually do it, going beyond the epistemic diversity, even keeping in mind also the global perspective of bringing the diversity of people to change perspectives.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to share our experience. And I would like to share a specific experience. I participated to an interdisciplinary journey initiated around 2016, 2017 by Nicola Labanca and Angela Pereira from the European Union's Joint Research Center, and which involved the perspectives of sociologists, physicists, engineers, economists, anthropologists, biologists, ecologists, and policy analysts. So very broad array of people. Actually, Clark Miller, also from this panel session, was also part of this process. And the goal was really to trigger an interdisciplinary discussion of the fundamental issues regarding policies for sustainable transition to renewable energy. And so this process led to different outcomes: an edited book, a workshop, a webinar, a joint article in a peer-reviewed energy journal to really trying to convey the main messages to researchers and policymakers. And I think the process was quite successful, because even though the experts were from very different and multiple backgrounds and disciplines, we managed to find a common language. And in this case, the common language was built around complex systems and social practices. And I think this specific epistemological, methodological angle was important, because complex systems and the acknowledgement that complex systems are in part socially constructed, of course, these complex systems are inherently multifaceted. And so seen from one angle, complex systems appear different from another angle. And so with complex socio-technical systems, many different people with different perspectives can find complementary voices to add to the discussion. I think a complexity perspective is really a necessary condition for multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and it also, of course, enable scientists and policymakers to really grasp the inherent complexity of energy policy challenges. So that was my experience I'd like to share with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas, also on the practical aspects of engaging with the reality of complex systems, which actually is helping with understanding the perspectives of different actors. Clark, you wanted to add on this, and then I have Tula, and I think we have maybe an audience member who will join as well before we have some new conversation. So Clark?
Thanks. This has been a great conversation. I'm really enjoying it. I would offer, I think, a couple of additional points that extend some of those that we've heard recently. The first is, I would say that, you know, one of the challenges that we really face in this space is that these transitions that we're talking about in order to achieve carbon neutrality are not just technological change, they're really economic and social transformations at the same time. And I think that really demands that we open up the array of epistemic diversity that we see in our scientific advisory processes, and really, in some ways, I think need to be much more ambitious about making these not just panels about energy transitions, but really panels about people-centered transitions. And I'm really impressed with the International Energy Agency's new people-centered energy transition commission as a kind of model for thinking about this. We really have, if you think back to the automobile and electricity, when we brought them in, we transformed society and we transformed whole economies. And that's what's happening again. And we really need that fully integrated perspective in order to understand the full dimensions of these transitions. As Jenny was saying, I think the second point I would make is that we need this integrated expert advice to go much deeper than it has thus far. It's one thing to bring it in at the very top level with respect to advising legislative or ministerial decision-making. But the reality is, as we undergo this transition over the next several decades, we're talking about regulatory decision-making, we're talking about energy strategy at the level of firms, electric utilities, cities, countries. We're talking about, we need it down at the level of grid redesign and transportation redesign. And ultimately, we need it in at the level of technology innovation to have this kind of integrated perspective and this epistemic diversity in our expert advice go all the way down. Because if it doesn't go all the way down, then we miss key pieces of the puzzle, and we end up in situations where we begin to lose, for example, public support for the transition as we go through it. And then the final point I'll make is that what we're increasingly aware of is that the decisions that we're making are not just about building a new kind of energy system that's carbon neutral. They're really about building different kinds of futures. And we have real choices about which kinds of futures we want. And we've been involved in some really interesting experiences of late, bringing together fiction writers, artists, cultural creatives, and others, as well as members of the public, to imagine different kinds of energy futures that might be possible if we make different choices about which kinds of carbon neutrality technologies and approaches to follow, and so forth. So thanks.
Thanks, Clark, also for opening on these ideas of how do you also forecast in different ways, including involving artists. I think we had Diana also bringing this idea that arts are also a way to bring in perspectives that are not usually done. We have with us an audience member. So Tula, if you agree, I will first give the floor to our participants and then back to you, if you're okay. So Alex, if you can switch on your webcam, introduce yourself quickly and give your intervention. I thank you very much for taking the chance to join the conversation from the audience. So you need also to switch on your microphone, Alex.
Damn it! Sorry, I clicked it. It didn't work. My apologies. So hi, I'm Alex. I work at the Institute for Advanced Studies at the University of Warwick at the moment, and also collaborate with the Global Research Network. And I work on issues of bioeconomy and sustainability. And I also wanted to add to this last conversation, which also Diana, of course, started, who I met about a year ago when she kindly spoke to us at the GRN and the Climate and Energy think tank, which I supervise, which is this issue of artistry and aesthetics being an important part of epistemic diversity in relating different groups in energy policy. I'm working with some artists like the Austrian Petra Mais or the French Gantor Robillard, who for the last 20 years have tried to work with scientists and figure out how energy problems, ecological problems can be made translated in a way that people can experience what that means, whether it is algorithms that model environmental destruction in the ocean, or the transformations that oceans undergo when energy projects like offshore wind parks are introduced to this environment, and have visual components or haptically available components for audiences to help people understand, but also give feedback to the scientists what is really going on there. And I think this is a question of methodology as well, because wherever we are in the academia, we have methods and we have theories, and they differ from discipline to discipline, but the way that we get from how we think to how we do this translation, that is a process we all are undergoing, and there's a big aesthetic component, and that is a basis through which we can communicate, that there are aesthetic elements to it, there are effective and embodied, real physical, feelable elements to it. And those can enable a communication among different disciplines, whether it's social scientists or engineers, as well as with decision makers in policy and the public. So that is perhaps a very mundane seeming intervention, but I do think, just like Clark and Diana, that there is a real opportunity here, which we cannot but must stress. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alex, for bringing this aspect that complements the idea of how the artistic part can actually bring the bridge between how do we think to how do we act. This is a very interesting message. Tula, you want to react to the conversation we have? And I know that we have another audience member who will join. I will also ask Christian, our next panelist, to join at some point. Tula, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I agree completely on the importance of arts and design in visualizing the kind of processes and effects that we are seeking after. Before becoming president of EVA, I was actually president of the Aalto University in Finland, where we merged 3 universities in technology, business, and art and design. And the absolutely largest impact of this merger was that we were able to integrate arts and design into the communication, into the visualization, into the design of different kinds of processes where engineering or business models and things like that can make into the society. The other thing that I think Thomas was taking up, is this differences in languages between the different sectors in society and also between the different disciplines. And I think that, the key to solving this challenge is participation. And that is why I think that, the science and engineering academies have quite an important role, because they are providing platforms from learning together, learning from each other, in order to explain and understand how scientific facts are generated in different fields and how they together can lead to effective policy decisions, so that we can reach these societal contracts, but both learning together, creating these platforms for interactions and participation, and increasing the role of art and design into these processes. I think these are important ways forward.
Thanks a lot, Tula, for complimenting also on the role of the different organizations like the academies for helping with the participation of different actors. We have another audience member. Katri, do you want to take the floor, introduce yourself, and give your intervention in this conversation?
Sure. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Katri Mäkinen-Roosted, and I'm a PhD candidate of international politics, and have been working before many years at the Council of Finnish Academies. So, for example, Tula is very familiar to me. I'm currently working with a project that has collected some longitudinal data on IPBES experts' views on knowledge and their value changes, and just wanted to bring something, share with you something that we have noticed about interdisciplinarity and epistemic diversity. So you have been sharing with us so many important points. But one thing is that what we noticed is that there are very much different ways of how experts think, how knowledge should be validated, and how we create knowledge, and how knowledge is actually put into action. And we constantly think that this follows disciplinary borders. But actually what we noticed is that this kind of epistemological thinking and how do you think that knowledge should be validated, it just doesn't actually follow disciplines. So social scientists can be kind of classified as positivist as well. So it's not just this assumption that engineers think in that way. So that was quite an interesting thing to notice. And we try to follow in this project whether working in interdisciplinary ways, that whether it changes experts' way of thinking. And we also noticed, going back a bit what Tula said about organizational roles, that it's a huge learning exercise for experts themselves as well, to learn this kind of reflexive way of thinking. And what Diana said, used the word of humility in epistemic ways. So it's this capacity building is really important as well, and kind of also noticing that these organizations like IPCC and IPES, they have their own epistemologies as well, and they socialize experts to certain ways as well. So
thanks a lot, Katri, for bringing this aspect also of how the experts engaging in these interdisciplinary platforms actually build their capacity and even evolve themselves in their ways of approaching the issues they are at stake and they are exploring. I think, Christian, actually, maybe that's a good topic to jump to you. And if anyone from the audience wants to join, please do ask Katri and Alex. Christian?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I'm really enjoying this conversation. So rather than just reiterating and sharing my, I guess, agreement much of what's been said, I just want to add another point to the discussion. And I think that's relating to evidence and what we consider as evidence. So because if we are to have truly interdisciplinary discussions, we also need to think about what sort of evidence are different disciplines supplying and what are the underlying assumptions for that evidence. And also what does that evidence mean? So I can share personally from having tried to sort of, I study behavioral science or behavior change, and having conversations with people doing integrated assessment models who mostly come from like trying to integrate new classical economics into more complex climatic biophysical systems. And because the evidence that we create, say in psychology, is not easily integratable into an integrated assessment model, because what we consider evidence don't fit neatly into an equation. So how do we think about the evidence that we, or it could be a sociologist, anthropologist, what they create as evidence, how do we then still integrate that into making some sort of policy recommendations? And that also sort of involves combating different assumptions about what goes into the models, for example, being explicit about it and being explicit about the limitations of those assumptions. And I think that's a critical step in terms of also broadening the scope of solutions or initiatives to tackle like climate change or the energy transformation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Christian. A very interesting question of the difference in what we call evidence, depending on where we come from, being in disciplines, but also being from policy or from other parts of the society. Jacopo, you wanted to add a little bit, and then I think Diana wants to jump in the conversation. Anyone from the audience?
I really enjoyed so many of the points from the colleagues, and I won't make that. I'll based on what Christian said on evidence. I can't agree more. There are disciplines which come with a certain ease to feed into evidence for policy. Okay, and I think I made the example initially of behavioral economics. I think we need to look at how our impact assessment system, our cost-benefit analysis, how they're designed to, in a sense, call for evidence and call for those numbers. And then there are other disciplines, and I made the example of social practice theory from sociology and anthropology, where it becomes harder to give those hard numbers. And I've had these conversations with energy policymakers for a few years, where they say, well, it's all very well, we hear all those other disciplines and all those other angles, but we cannot be as holistic unless we have some numbers for our impact assessments. So I just really relate to what Christian just said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very like down to the earth sometimes comment that you get back when you go on this discussion with policymakers. Diana, you want to jump in, and I recall to the audience that they can also take a chance to join the conversation. Diana.
Thank you. Yes, it's a fascinating discussion. So I just want to offer the point of the importance of also epistemic democracy, so that we should try to treat each of the contributing disciplines mutually fertilizing rather than one serving the other. And I think we very unconsciously don't do this yet. So we think we are very diverse and think we are very inclusive, but in the end, very often, for example, the social sciences are there only to serve, to support the engineering or the economics or the science. And one example is, and this is very unconscious, but often we invite the social scientists only to say, okay, here is our perfect technologies, and here are these stupid people who don't want to take up our wonderful technologies. So how can we make them accepted? So, but instead asking vice versa, let's ask the social scientists what technologies people want and how people in general relate to technologies, and us engineers trying to more approach this with more humility and perhaps adopt to this, because I think without applying this more humility, we are failing often. And the same a bit with art, and I'm by no means criticizing Tula, because I did exactly the same. But just last week I was in arts workshop and I was the scientist invitee, and then I faced it that I also said, it's really great that finally we're working with arts and you can translate our fantastic science. I didn't say fantastic, but our messages to art and get closer to people's hearts. But then the artist said, yeah, but shouldn't it be the other way around, or the both ways, to mutually? Why don't scientists also want to learn from arts? And we can learn from them as well, because and what I was referring to, that because people don't only decide by rationale and by science, but by their feelings, and perhaps we can also benefit from understanding better the feelings, and that artists do better.
Yeah, thanks, Diana. The two ways. Not just calling up for helping at, why aren't you translating what we want into something that can help? I don't know, Clark or Tula, if you want to react to this aspect from your perspective. Clark has.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The experience that we've had is in a couple of books that we've recently produced, but on the future of solar energy. And the kinds of societies that we might build around solar energy. And the absolutely crucial to those processes was that we put together multidisciplinary teams with writers and artists and social scientists and engineers. And together they worked over a period of 2 days, each team, to imagine a future world given a certain set of inputs into the kinds of technologies that would be available in that world, and then to imagine the kinds of people who would live in those future worlds, and then to collaborate on building storylines, which then what we asked each of the participants to do is then to write a story, develop their art, or offer some sort of technical or social commentary. And so each person brings their own disciplinary experience, but the interdisciplinary dialogues and learning that happens at the beginning then informs back into each of the different experiences.
Thanks a lot, Clark. Tula, maybe to reflect a little bit on these interventions, and then we have an audience member who just joined us. So, Tula?
Yeah, just a short comment. You know, it was not my intention to say that, you know, this discussion we had so many times in Aalto that, you know, artists are not visualizing what already is. And one of our movie directors actually said that there are two different ways of learning in society. One is by facts and science, and the other one is by experience. And the thing is that, you know, these kind of interventions, you know, and collaborations with the artist can give deeper understanding of things which appeal to people better than our tables and Excel tables, you know, which is by narrative. And that's what I mean, that there is a strength in the artistic way of communication, which is more appealing, more easy to understand for people that are not in science. But it is very important, you know, that it goes both ways, and that you have this interdisciplinary humility, you know, that you understand that, you know, the artists and the designers are not there to explain you, but they have powerful tools for doing so, and also kind of an essential part of the learning process. So I agree completely.
Thank you, Tula. We're welcoming now someone from the audience before I give the floor to Jeannie and Thomas. Could you introduce yourself and give the intervention, Yvon?
Yeah, I will be brief. I'm no longer working in energy, but about 7 years ago, I was the main analyst for the review of the Quebec energy policy. For those who are not, Quebec is a province of Canada, so we're about 8 million population, and we are quite the largest electricity consumer in the world. And our electricity has no carbon content because it's come out by a very large hydro dam in the north. And it's make us in a very different place than the rest of the world as an energy policy, because everything we do on the other side of the planet does not work here. And that's what our main, when we work on the policy, that was our main problem, because we are all those, actually, my experience is the opposite. Politicians listen a lot to people in social science, especially political scientists. But from the engineering and the economic point of view, what was proposed originally didn't make any sense. For various reasons, Quebecers are very proud of their large dam in the north, which is a historical success story for the society. But today, they are economic burden. Building new dams is ecological and economic burden. And there has been politicians making idea of picking your hub of electricity and selling to the United States. But if you do basic economic analysis, this too is an error. You will losing money when selling to the United States if you build new dam. If you have excess money, we will live it, but otherwise, and we have these very technical things that destroy the magnificent idea generated by the politician. And we have to fight against that. And also I would like to comment about usage of social science and other fields by engineer. Actually, it's mandatory in Canada, and in the practical guide of practice of engineering, you have to use every kind of knowledge you could before starting a project. You have to check the ethics, you have to check the environment, you have to check the social impact. The problem is many knowledge from the other field are not actionable. You cannot, give you information, but can you use it to make a choice? There are a lot of things, you know, if you build something, create pollution, but you can calculate somehow the pollution impact. But social impact is very difficult to integrate in a way. You can reduce noise level to a level what is less annoying, but we had this issue with the windmill. Windmill, you can control the noise level, you can do a lot of things, but they still annoy people because it's site. It has nothing to do with biology or physics.
Yeah, there is a challenge. Actionable knowledge from other disciplines is something that's difficult to integrate with the assessments. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yvon, for joining this conversation. Jenny, do you want to jump in and also take up some of those comments we had from Yvon and from...
Yes, yeah, so I was going to just follow up on, related to the point that was just made, but also going back to Diana's idea of democratizing the disciplines and not having a hierarchy of disciplines, and this idea of humility. And there's an arrogance among many scientists that they know, and if everyone else just understood what they know, then the energy and climate problems of the world would be solved, which is really unfortunate, and I think unproductive, and it causes a lot of it actually slows us down with the urgency. So I wanted to also just acknowledge this idea of energy democracy, which sees the transformation in energy systems as an opportunity that yes, it will help with climate, but there are so many other reasons to move away from fossil fuels toward a more renewable-based future that have nothing to do with greenhouse gas emissions or decarbonization. So I think there's this opportunity that we get lost sometimes when we focus on the science of climate as a justification for energy, and focus only on decarbonization and greenhouse gas emission accounting and all of that. And we miss so much. So I just also want to highlight how important it is to think about the opportunity of this huge transformation that we're in the process of, and how we can redistribute power, literally and figuratively. And there's social, there's economic and political implications and opportunities to invest in communities in whole new ways that we just haven't done and are actually desperately needed. So connecting energy with health and food and housing and jobs and fundamental economic prosperity for everyone is such an opportunity that some of the science that we think of in these narrow terms just isn't working on and isn't making these connections. So we also need to reframe some of the processes for integrating science into policy, because the conventional approaches are insufficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot, Jeannie, for also triggering some more thinking of the big picture and beyond the usual silos of thinking. I have Thomas, and then we'll finish with an audience member who just joined Heather. So Thomas, quickly, if you want to summarize a little bit how you feel about these different aspects that we
Yes, thank you. So I very much agree with what Jenny just said, and also about this epistemic democracy by Diana. So it's not always easy to convey messages about social factors in a field that is arguably dominated by techno-economic types of analysis. I feel that the human dimension is often overlooked when we talk about energy policy. And there is often a kind of instrumental approach to social sciences when it comes to energy policy. And so that resonates very much with what Diana said about using social sciences to advance the social acceptance of specific technology, and viewing energy communities, for example, as a tool to enhance the efficiency of energy flows in grids, or as a way to enhance social acceptance of a certain technology, while energy communities could be could question, are indeed institutional opportunities for questioning the social relations around energy systems. They could be true laboratories for citizen participation and spaces to prefigure alternative energy systems. So I very much agree with Jenny on this.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. Finally, in the last part of our conversation, Heather, from the audience, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and have a brief intervention on what you want to bring to the conversation?
So I'm a philosopher of science that has also been following and working on energy policy, including public participation in energy policy decisions for the past few years. And I wanted to just point out a tension between the sort of desire for complexity and detail that experts love to get into in the modeling, and the way in which, when you actually engage with, say, multidisciplinary teams that Clark was talking about, or the sort of energy democracy that Jenny was pointing to, you usually need to make some kind of simplifying assumptions to get the thing going. And how to make those simplifying assumptions, or how to move away from sort of the desire to get all the complexities in, I think is a really big challenge for democratic practice. And I have colleagues who work on participatory modeling, where they actually bring in members of the public to help make assumptions about models. I have done energy planning exercises where we take all the energy for a system and convert it all to gigajoules, and then worry about changing it out at 1 gigajoule levels with energy efficiency or energy transformation to electrification or non-greenhouse gas systems, to try to get at things that people can work with without the full complexity of our disciplines, which we almost never bring to a fully transdisciplinary context. So just making life a little more complicated for everyone.
Well, at the same time, Heather, it's a nice way to also finish for catalyzing even more conversation within this group or within some other communities. We're reaching the end of this fishbowl. I think everyone can take a deep breath now after this sprint through this conversation. I'm going to pass it now for maybe what they have, picked from this conversation, what they want to highlight to our two final speakers. And first, Sebastian Renault. Sebastian, if you want to first introduce yourself briefly and give your insights from what we just heard today. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Estelle, for that. And before introducing myself, I wanted to thank you, the JRC and SAPEA, and also Alessandro and Kristen, who helped me a lot to prepare for that session. So thank you for your guidance and for organizing this. It's really, it was very interesting to participate in that session and hear what was said. What I can say for myself is I work for the European Commission. I'm the deputy head of unit for unit that deals with governance and public administration in DG reform, and my job is to help administration reform themselves. And basically, I spent 20 years in the public sector working in engineering, financing, research, policymaking, and now my job for the last 10 years is to try to increase the quality of public administration. It's what really I've been working on. Now, the thing I would say is that the main takeaway from the session for me, I heard a number of things which actually go along what I had planned to say during the session. So the things that were flagged that I retain are the importance of independence of science, the importance of the work on better regulation, but that's also a very commission way of looking at things, and the need to mix all the branches of science to achieve real deep diversity in the analysis. And I was surprised to hear about art, but actually it matches many of the work that we've been doing. We were not there yet, but I think we should come to that at some point. Because what is at the key and what I heard is the impact of knowledge on policy making. That's really what people are after here. And there is a very big element of pleasure that I hear in the intervention of many people in the key and success stories. Now, I can say that in my career, I had the chance to work on a number of big and recent crises, and I have seen what could be good epistemic diversity in policy making. And I've also seen cases, especially during the economic crisis, of what bad knowledge diversity or epistemic diversity could be, and the negative impact it could have. I will just say that on the public administration and the work we do, I think what we define as Commission as the foundation of a good administration is its capacity to look at all aspects of an issue in an educated and humble way. And that word of humility is also a word that was repeated a lot during the session today. And I think that's what makes for the design of good public policy and a good implementation later. I'll just mention the fact that the Commission has recently released a staff working document on the topic and how we can support, increase the quality of public administration. It identifies a number of systemic issues that we have along technological change, the demographic changes, and the skill gap that we have on some fields, and the increasing complexity of policy issues. That's something that is a reality. And the Commission is trying to help on that. So we try to help identify issues, support the design and implementation of reforms, but we also provide capacity building tools, peer-to-peer guidance, the exchange of knowledge and experience, financial resources, which I think many member states of the EU are really looking at. And we promote very much through the JRC and the RTD, the research and innovation in member states. So in this context, I've worked on a number of reform in member states where we try to really improve for some of the most advanced member states, what could be better public administration, and how can we better handle foresight and futures and try to plan the policy making in a way that takes in all the knowledge that we have about what is happening right now and what may happen in the future. So I'll mention my feedback on a few projects. There is one where we worked for the Treasury, the Department of Treasury for France, where we helped them reorganize. What they had as an issue is the fact that they are extremely skillful people, but they could see that their impact on the policy making was not as big as it should be, based on the knowledge of information that they acquire, the analysis they do. And they try to also work more in interdisciplinary teams and to build capacity in the system. Some of the things we did was very much on HR planning and diversity. And it crosses some of the feedback that Jenny gave, that we indeed need to bring completely different people in terms of skills and knowledge, but also in terms of background and diversity, something that was brought in very, very strongly. And also to break silos, we tried new tools, organizational tools, the matrix organization, creation of project teams. This works very well. And one of the things that I like, and I think applies a lot to what we said today, is the idea that we need to restructure the output, the studies that are presented to policymakers so that they understand them better. And I think that's where we can look into art. We can try to look into social sciences to be able to better sell the analysis that is being made. I'll take another example for Finland, which is really at the forefront of what we do in terms of strategic thinking and foresight. And their issue was also to try to close the gap between the very good analysis they have of futures and the policy they actually take, and also to try to improve the culture on foresight. So what we ended up doing, what we're looking into right now, is to try to integrate that knowledge and that foresight into core strategic processes, to have it built in the legal, budgetary, strategic processes, also to involve citizens and stakeholders. And I go back to one of the comments, I think, from Tuula on the science academies at the beginning, to be able to orientate future policy creation. Also increase the capacity of public servants on their knowledge, recruitment, training of people, and also try to gather large when you hire people. And also build strong anticipatory governance mechanism to allow for long-term policy. And I think that is very important. Something we didn't touch upon very much during the session today is how we ensure that the government, which has a very short-lived duration in most of the countries, can actually plan through its administration into very long-term cycle to be able to plan better the policies, not just over 4 or 5 years, but over very, very long decades, because that's what we're talking about. As a conclusion, I will just say that the things I retained from the session are the necessity to break silos. And I think also building networks is very useful, especially during times of crisis, where you need to rely on existing system to be able to make educated decisions. And the very narrow knowledge of people who tend to intervene is a problem, and I have seen it. I think in administrations, we need to build diversity of skills and profile. And the Commission is trying very hard to do that, but I think it goes just beyond the gender gap. It's also background of people, the demographic background and social background of people, and knowledge that is being brought in. The need to expand the policy time horizon through co-creation in particular. And for me, it's very much a need to invest in research and innovation. But I think where we need to work on the most is to communicate that knowledge better to policymakers, because we are not the ones making decisions. We provide reports, we provide guidance, we don't take decisions. And that's where there is a very big gap, because as many of you said, the decisions are not always taken on fact. Some more elements come into play and we need to address them better. So that's my taking from that session. Thank you very much for inviting me, and Estelle for chairing that session with so much grace and elegance with your difficult job, but very, very interesting. And I'm looking forward to more discussion on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. For the final words, I will pass now the virtual floor to David Mayer. David, if you can also introduce yourself.
Thanks very much, Estelle. So my name is David Mayer. I run a unit in the JRC, the Commission's Science and Knowledge Service, trying to promote getting science into policy and politics. We do research, we do training, and we're also trying to, with colleagues in DG Reform and elsewhere, DG Research, to incentivize the member states to start investing in getting more systematically getting science into policy. I mean, goodness me, what can I possibly say after these wonderful interventions from Sebastian, Naki, and the fishbowl panels, very well handled by you, Estelle. I was trying to draw some threads together, which is not easy, but I think it's astonishing how everyone agreed that epistemic diversity is absolutely indispensable for solving public policy problems. The problems that we are facing, the scale and complexity is such now that it's clear that no one or even two disciplines is going to solve these problems. We're going to need to bring in, everything we've got, all the possible knowledge we've got. And this was crystallized a bit for me at one point when we were monitoring the composition of the various COVID advisory committees that national governments had set up. And, who should be in there? Epidemiologists, vaccinologists, economists, education experts. And on Twitter, I asked, so can we start assembling a list of which academic disciplines need to be in there? And a few people gave some suggestions, and somebody eventually said, all of them. The only answer for okay, that's a bit of a generalization, but you would struggle to say that was wrong. I think you could probably make a reasonably good case why pretty much every academic discipline you might care to name had something to add to COVID. So that is where we are. And I think that's quite a positive breakthrough that we've recognized we do need all this knowledge. But what I also heard actually coming out of the debate is it's not merely a question of diversity in terms of knowledge. It's actually a much broader diversity. And in particular, what I think I heard is that we need to have a values diversity. There are a variety of ways which policy problems can be framed, which come a bit from what you think the problem is and what you want to do about it. And that is something that we in my team are working very closely on. We have a report coming out in the next couple of weeks on the science of values and identities. And it's clear that there is a lot of values diversity within populations. And if you want to make successful policies, you do need to understand that. You need to understand people who want different things from public policy than you yourself. We don't all think the same. So I would say yes to epistemic diversity, absolutely clear, but also we need to grasp the values diversity within our populations. And these two things are linked, because most failures of evidence for policy I have seen have not become about because of the lack of quality of the evidence. It's because there were some very important concerns citizens had that we hadn't picked up on, and we hadn't then gathered the necessary evidence to substantiate or refute or understand those concerns at the beginning. So when we came to the moment of decision, the citizen said, but what about this problem? And we said, oh, well, we never thought of that because we don't see that as part of the problem. And therefore we don't have any evidence on that. So first point then, I think yes to epistemic diversity, but yes to also values diversity, and let's make the connections between them. So that all sounds fine, but the trouble is, of course, the more perspectives you add, this all becomes very complicated. Understanding different perspectives is difficult. Reconciling them, synthesizing them is difficult. It requires real effort, differences of language, opinion, approach. And the world is getting worse. I mean, it looks like science is fragmenting. People are developing ever more sort of niches and disciplines. And so we are losing the ability to have a common language and connections across the boundaries. Scientists are quite interested in deepening within their own field. Perhaps they are less incentivized to talk across the boundaries and talk to people in other disciplines. So we have a major problem that there are not really the incentives within science, whether it's professorships or journals or perhaps research grants, to push scientists to do the interdisciplinary work. So everyone talks a great game on how wonderful this stuff is, but no one's actually doing it on the science side, or not as much as we would like. People are doing it and doing it very well, because basically the fundamental incentives in science are not there. The fundamental incentives in science are perhaps pushing against interdisciplinary work. So that's clearly a big problem, because this work of synthesis, it's not easily done and it's not going to come for free. And I think the problem we have, therefore, is that we recognize we need this, but it's not going to self-organize. It's not going to happen on its own. So what is the way forward? I think from Sebastian and others we heard that I think basically the policymakers are going to have to bash heads together. The policymakers, the demand side, is the thing that needs to get organized. And to start putting down the incentives and the structure to the problems that will drive the scientists and the disciplines to work together. That's the only substantive solution, is that we have a much more powerful pull from the policymakers. And it's clear from a policymaking point of view, you do want interdisciplinary work, you do want diversity. You know, one particular piece of science doesn't help you pull together the impact assessment. So what do we need to do on the demand side? I think we need policymakers who are comfortable talking to people from different disciplines and able to understand what they're saying. So they need to be trained in those sort of general critical thinking, science interpretation, data science skills, and we're doing some work on the skills of policymakers. But I think also fundamentally you need to put some investment into structures and institutions of knowledge broking to able to act as the interface between the science and pull the scientists together to convene the committees and make sure the right disciplines are there, and to do the hard work of knowledge brokerage and knowledge synthesis. So that's the work we've been doing a little bit with DG Reform, is to see how we can stimulate the member states to start investing in that and seeing it as an investment that will pay off. So that, I think, is an absolutely crucial way forward in all of that. And then I think the last thing I heard that I think is all part of this perspective ultimately is we need to develop the tools and craft also to bring citizens into the picture. There shouldn't be just a bilateral conversation between researchers and government. This needs to be a three-way conversation with bringing citizens into the process. And that's the way where you ultimately reconcile the values diversity and the epistemic diversity and start to bring it all together. And also what you get out of that is rather than the formal knowledge that comes out of science, you get the indispensable informal, local, tacit knowledge that citizens have about the problem in their area. And that's always essential to policy making. So that was it. Great session. Thanks, SAPEA, and thanks, colleagues.
Thank you very much, David, for these closing words. Also inspiring for next ways to go forward into what the conversation has brought to the surface. That was a very enriching and exciting session. I hope it was also for you. I would like all our panelists and speakers to turn on their webcam so I can all thank you very much for bearing with us, with me, with this very special format and keeping it flowing quite well. I also would like to thank you for the quality of all the interventions from the audience. I mean, that was really nice to see some of the audience members joining us for this session. And you see on the screen some of the other events you can follow. And of course, a recording of this satellite session will be available on the website. Thank you to everyone, and wishing you a nice end of the afternoon or end of the day for the ones who were in the morning part of the day. Thank you, and hopefully for our next event.
Thank you, Estelle, again. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.